What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I'll tell you about punk rock. Punk rock is a word used by dilettantes and heartless manipulators about music that takes up the energies and the bodies and the hearts and the souls and the time and the minds of young men who give what they have to it and give everything they have to it. And it's a term that's based on contempt. It's a term that's based in fashion, style, elitism, Satanism, and everything that's rotten about rock and roll.
These men come down here from New York and from Florida to find out my reasons on rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today. I 100% believe it. Why I believe that is because I know how it feels when you sing it. I know what it does to you. And I know the evil feeling that you feel when you sing it. I know the lost position that you get into in the beat. Well, if you talk to the average teenager of today and you ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
Music has always been a pretty important part of my life, and particularly since my teenage years, like I imagine many of us. And my teenage years began right in the early 90s as the Seattle sound was becoming famous and all those grunge bands and everything. And it definitely impacted me a lot, just in terms of my own sensibilities and what I was drawn to. Just loving the heavy guitars and the drumming and lots of feedback, and definitely an anti-establishment sort of mentality, but that, at least at the beginning, you know, the whole punk rock ethos definitely appealed to me. And so the music question is one that I've thought about for, you know, years and years and years, and how it relates to spirituality and what God really intended music to be and the purposes it serves, and what type of music is honoring to God and what is not. The whole question of the devil's music. Obviously, you can go on YouTube and watch plenty of videos and documentaries talking about, you know, the satanic music industry, and there's so much to that. I mean, you could spend hours just looking at all the satanic things in rock music, and, you know, from its earliest stages in the 60s and all the way through today. So it's a strange sort of relationship, I guess, I have with music, specifically rock and roll. Although I think the conversation applies to pretty much everything that falls under pop, whether it's rap or anything else. I mean, everything has a beat, everything has a hook, everything is intended to move you and make you feel things. And, you know, that's really the question, I guess, is when you're aware of the fact that music is such a powerful tool to influence people, not just on a conscious level when you're singing lyrics and absorbing the things that people are singing about, but just even the music itself, just the emotion, the feelings, the intangible side, that certain tones and instruments can play and have an effect on you in very subtle and, you know, subconscious ways. So yeah, I guess when it comes to like rock music and heavier, faster, louder things, you know, it's easy to just write it all off as rebellious or angry or dark, and I get why a lot of people, I mean, so much of it is. I mean, absolutely. I mean, so much of those bands from the 90s, those grunge bands and stuff, yeah, there's nothing God-honoring about them in terms of what they sing about or what they represent as a band, as a brand or whatever, or the singers. But yeah, I was still influenced by a lot of the sound. And then specifically when I started listening to what quickly became my favorite band for years and probably still today, was a band out of Seattle called Sunny Day Real Estate. With the lead singer Jeremy Enoch, and they were only together for a few short, tumultuous years, but the music that they made in that time was just unlike anything I'd ever heard. In terms of how it captured that angry, sort of punk-influenced riffs and charging drums and real complex bass lines and just really well-crafted like punk songs, but then overlaid with, you know, very melodic guitars and singing by Jeremy. You know, and it was the kind of thing like, I want to be in a band and I want it to sound like that. And that was kind of my trajectory for a long time, into my 20s. You know, I wanted to play drums like William Goldsmith, and he was kind of one of those, you know, where I really looked at him like as an artist himself, with the rhythms that he came up with and the way he played, and it was just hard and loud, and, you know, it just drove every song. And, you know, so there was a sense of that there was, you know, angst, and there was pain, and there was this sort of, yeah, that sort of punk ethos that you're fighting against a constraint that you don't even quite know how to put into words. And, you know, in music, their music and music like it was almost like a soundtrack for my life, where you just identify with it so much. It's one of those very defining things. You know, it sounds cliche, but you know, and from there with Sunny Day, and as I got older and started going to lots of shows and wanting to see bands live, and kind of understanding that there's this whole indie, you know, unsigned, you know, there's local scenes and all these bands, and, you know, there's more than just what's on corporate radio. You know, learning about the whole indie world, you know, I definitely just eventually became immersed in that, and, you know, working at clubs doing security just so I could see free shows and things like that, and wanting to be part of a scene, and just, you know, music was, you know, I guess when I look back at it now, you know, music, there was very large chunks of time where music was my religion. Music was what I was looking to fill something in me. So there's, you know, there's that whole idolatry aspect, even if it's, and you can do that with any type of music. So it's not even just about, you know, rock and roll or whatever else. It's, you know, you could be a classical violinist, and that could be your idol. You play the most beautiful pieces or whatever. You know what I mean? Idolatry is idolatry. But it definitely was for me for times, and there were times where then I had to just step away. You know, there was a period like in my late 20s, I didn't play drums for like several years. And I just, because I had been so fixated on wanting to record music and find people to collaborate with and just do projects. It wasn't like it wasn't the dream of being the rock star and being rich and famous and all that. It was more the dream of being a starving indie rock, purist. Maybe work a couple part-time jobs here and there just to survive and just live the rock and roll lifestyle. Music was a drug, in many ways. And so that's, again, why it's hard, because you go, a lot of the music especially now as I progressed, I got more into instrumental bands, where there is no singer, there are no lyrics, so you just feel whatever it makes you feel. So, and that's where it gets very, less clear, like what is, can you worship God by listening to a 5-minute instrumental rock song? I would say, yeah, I definitely think you can. I think I do quite often, but at the same time, does that apply to like all the music you listen to that is of the same genre or same, obviously not. How do you even have discernment over how much is a decent amount, how much is a healthy amount to even listen to? And I have to admit that probably the number one most difficult thing that I would have a hard time not having access to if I didn't have the internet would be music first and foremost, and that's so it's still a big part of just my routine, listening to music while I'm doing sort of menial tasks. And obviously that's not wrong, but if it was taken away and I didn't have YouTube or Pandora or things, all these things, I know I'd go through withdrawals. I know I would. So how's that not an addiction then, if you go through withdrawals? But at the same time, Satan didn't invent music. Satan didn't invent rhythm. I don't believe, anything with the beat. That's what's so interesting when you listen to all those old footage from the 50s and everything in the 60s, when preachers and stuff were reacting to this new rock and roll phenomenon and seeing people freak out over the Beatles, and they just thought it was this like satanic hysteria, and it was, in many ways. I mean, how do you separate rock and roll itself from this overlying sort of agenda of cultural transformation? I'm not oblivious to that at all. Obviously, it's huge. So it's strange to then, at the same time, have this affinity, have this identification with certain types of music and sound, and trying to kind of glean what is good in it, or what is honest, what is honest expressions of people's inner feelings and longings and reactions to the world, that have legitimacy and have validity and are not necessarily in conflict with our identity as people who believe in God and believe in Jesus and live in the world that we live in today. And that's where I think, especially now that, and it's not like I ever anticipated making videos when I was wanting to be in an indie band, and yet so now music is a big part of pretty much all my videos. There's very few that don't have any. It's part of just how I think, and how most of what if I've written or recorded was in the context of listening to that piece of music. And it's a variety, but it's mostly like what you might call post-rock, a lot of instrumental stuff, obviously. If you're gonna like talk over it, you can't have singing. But bands like Radiohead, obviously that's a big favorite of mine. Totally into New Age spirituality, and it's not God interfering at all. So, but yeah, a lot of the melodies and the compositions are just amazing. It's weird sometimes when you take music from somebody that you know doesn't believe in God, and then you use it in a video that you're talking about things that they would probably find offensive, and you're kind of taking it and making it your own. You know, I try and do that more with like covers. You know, one of the nice things about YouTube, you know, it's like almost any popular song has like instrumental versions and just covers that people have just done privately, and I use those a lot too, because sometimes they sound even better than the original, because they focus on, you know, they can sort of pull out a melody or whatever. That it's amazing how the same song can sound like so differently, performed by different people, recorded by different people. But yeah, even the new age, I mean, like with post-rock, so there's no lyrics, there's no singing, but then even when, like, so many of the bands that I do find myself listening to and really liking, you know, it's like the music can just be amazing and can relate to spiritual things and this battle that we're in, you know, against this onslaught of opposition to God, you know, the mystery religion just manifesting itself in a million different ways, and man elevating himself towards God. That's really at the heart of everything, obviously. So, like, even with a lot of these bands, it's like, yeah, there's no lyrics, but they still have names for the songs, and the song, you know, that can tell you a lot about where they're at. And so many of them have, like, crazy new age themes of every sort, and symbolism on the album covers that are just, you know, now I recognize where so much of that comes from, whether it's like sacred geometry or, you know, occult symbolism, or it's very esoteric. There's a lot of esoteric sort of allusions in the post-rock world, right? Which is ironic because that's what I'm speaking out against so much of the time. But yeah, so I'm not unaware of that. But then again, it's like, just because that's where their mindset is at, does that mean that the music is ipso facto, you know, tainted with esoteric influences if you listen to it? You know, is there redeemable aspects to it? You know, it's the question that just kind of I go round and round with all the time. I don't have easy pat answers to them. I don't think they exist. But, you know, you just have to, it's one of those questions where you just have to keep asking the question and just keep knowing that there's a balance somewhere. You can't just draw clean little legalistic lines like this type of instrument is evil and this type of instrument is good, and these frequencies are the evil frequencies and the dark frequencies, and these ones are the good ones. I can't subscribe to that. You know, I like sound. You're telling me that there's good sound and evil sound. It's like saying that there's good light and evil light. You know, light is light. It depends on what it's reflecting off of, or however light really works. Let's not go there. So anyhow, yeah, I used to hate like techno music, like of all kinds, and now it's funny how much I've broadened into lots of experimental and atmospheric kinds of sounds. You know, sometimes they are good to just kind of stimulate your thinking in the background. And sometimes you feel like, yeah, it is trying to put you in a trance, and I don't know. Yeah, where's the line with that? What is hypnotic music and what is... I mean, all music has a beat, even hymns from hundreds of years ago, you know. You may not think of it as having a beat, but it does. Everything is timed. All music is arranged into time signatures. It just is. Otherwise, it's just, yeah, the atmospheric sort of ethereal, new agey, you know, sounds. You know, I've listened to plenty of that because obviously it all bleeds together. Once you get into the instrumental music world, it all just kind of blends into every type of instrumental music, because, you know, that's not really a genre, so it just covers everything that's just without singing. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that sounds really, you know, doesn't sound... I don't hate it, but that I can see how it's trying to be just hypnotic and like listen to it while you meditate or whatever. But I still connect so much when I listen to stuff that is just driving, angular, riff-driven or guitar-driven heavy stuff. That quote-unquote rebellious type sound, whatever version you want to talk about. And that's probably the context where it comes up in a lot of my videos, where you're talking about this New World Order system. You're talking about this grand conspiracy, this invisible war that's going on. And it's a war for your mind and a war for your heart that's being waged through all these different mediums and medias, and has been going on throughout all of history. And the progression of music over the centuries is just one fascinating chapter of the broader drama, with good and bad, Maybe that's part of it, is that trying to find things that you connect with from other artists, even if they don't know God, but there's, when you hear something that has an honesty to it, has some sort of raw essence that came from somebody's soul, not just trying to throw together a catchy pop song, but something that makes you feel something. I don't know that I could ever condemn that. Then too, when it's the driving, a little bit of anger, a little bit of angst, a few tablespoons of punk rock thrown in the mix, it's the whole question of what is holy defiance? What is righteous indignation, from a Christian perspective? When you start to learn about all these really screwy, scary things about the world that most people don't see. And you're the crazy one, so, you are the outsider, you are the misfit. So there's a lot of commonality, right? But how do you not make it an idol? And how do you not make it... Sometimes I do have to just turn it off, because I've just listened to way too much stuff that it does start to fester, like just angry feelings or anxiety. Not anxiety, but just an unrest. When it overrides a sense of peace, when you have no peace because you're just angry at the world, that's for, how many millions of teenagers, and the whole stereotype of teenagers just angry at everything and listens to heavy metal music or whatever, or rap or whatever, it's rebellious teenage, juvenile delinquency, right? Good old-fashioned teenage rebellion. So I guess maybe the question is really, what are the redeeming qualities of rebellion, of defiance? That is a nuanced question. Because on the one hand, submission to God means just total surrender to Him and obedience, because you trust Him and you love Him, and you say, yeah, you can have control of my life. You're not a tyrant. I see that now. I see the servant king that Jesus is, and, would Jesus be listening to that kind of music? I don't, probably not, I don't know. How much of it is just cultural? We're all born into a cultural context, and that affects your taste in music and everything else. And, coming to know God doesn't mean being completely absolved from any sorts of cultural connections or heritage, right? And so, growing up in America in the 90s, that was my cultural heritage, right? As much as it was just coming from, the Illuminati satanic music industry. At the same time, there's real people that are really writing the songs. There is real art in there too. There are nuggets of truth even in a lot of those songs from like the 60s and stuff. Little elements, a lot of propaganda and a lot of new age messaging, obviously. The satanic messaging, all humanistic, everything. But even if like 98% of it is just crap, it's that 2% that I still go, man, that made me feel something, and I don't think it was, and I want to know why. That was it for me once I started to kind of hear rock music being used in a way that didn't just embody, rebellion or partying or just the world sucks, Nirvana and all that. Or it's just despair and hopelessness, Live it up, do whatever, who gives a crap. That it could be like reflective and thoughtful and intelligent. Like rock music can be philosophical. Sounds dumb, but... So yeah, I've been thinking about this video for a long time, but I didn't really know what I was going to say, just because I know I could talk on and on for hours. talking just about a million different bands that I like or don't like or whatever. But trying to get down to the underlying issues that are irrespective of whatever my specific preferences are. I do have a playlist under this channel that a lot of the music that I've used in different videos and just stuff that I like is in there. If you're curious, because sometimes people ask and sometimes I forget to put a link to the song in the video. I'm pretty bad about that. But yeah, that's there. When you think about rhythm, I think about the fact that, especially when you spend enough time researching cosmology, or the luminaries and all that, just the creation itself has a rhythm. God created everything in cycles and numbers and timing. It's a big clock, the cosmic clock of the heavens. I know that everything has a beat. Your heart has a beat, and it speeds up and slows down, but I don't think Satan invented the beat. I think just like everything else, he's tried to take it and use it to his own ends and, turn it into something profane and hostile to God, of course, just like everything else. But it wasn't his idea. Rhythm, timing, melody, harmony, the crescendo. I really like music that actually builds. That's what's sort of a very common element in a lot of post-rock and instrumental bands. Is like it's not just verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse. They're almost like orchestral pieces so much of the time. They're like these. They're sort of epic in how they start very slow and atmospheric, and it can take 5 minutes to build up to where you're actually in where the whole band is playing. And, so it builds and falls, and that was a big part of a lot of music in the 90s and the alternative or whatever. There's the loud, soft, loud, or soft, loud, Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana and every band, and then the Pixies. And I know that I know I've annoyed a lot of people. It's sometimes playing music where it goes from being very soft to suddenly just blasting their ears. That's very normal to me. I don't find it jarring. I know some people don't like that at all. But it's telling a story or taking you on a journey or taking you somewhere, prompting some thought. Like music that it's like a movie soundtrack for the ponderings in your mind and the things that you're going through in life at that time or times past. And, nostalgia is a crazy thing with music. But God had to be the one to create us to have that emotional connection with sound. It's such a strange thing. It makes sense why so much of esoteric and New Age spirituality is all obsessed with vibrations and frequencies and all that. In terms of it relating to spiritual things and your well-being and your mindset and your consciousness and all that, right? Because there is an element of truth buried in there, in the sense that God made music, which is vibrations made by all sorts of different objects and now digitally, but vibrations of air that actually connect to you like on your innermost level and connect to you to feelings and things that you can't even sometimes put into words. There's music all throughout the Bible, both in the people of God and even in the heavens and with the angels and trumpets, and can't even imagine what that sounds like. Angelic music. Won't that be amazing to get to hear? But God is the one who created that connection and created that relationship between sound and spirit. Your thoughts, innermost feelings. And maybe there's something about the fact that as so much of the world just gets more and more artificial, more and more imposing in terms of just this technocratic sort of creep, where our humanity collectively just feels like it's being whittled away bit by bit by bit. Nobody even knows how to talk to each other anymore, and everything's through technology. I think in some ways music is more important to me now than ever, or at least in even in a different way, into where wanting to feel that connection with something on a very human soul level, whether, across the whole spectrum of sounds and the spectrum of feelings and intensities and tempos and everything, instruments, but just to feel, just to stay connected to feeling. And that you're not just a consumer, you're not just a citizen, you're not owned by the state and defined by everything that the world says you should be defined by. That your worth and your inner self is not defined by anything of this worldly system. Even if you're listening to music that came through it, right? You still want to hear that human cry. That's the defiance, I guess. That's what I feel like I'm still rebelling against. The slow erosion of the basic sacredness of human beings, the erosion of God's truth, the opposition to His love. Is that kind of a contradiction? Basically, you're talking about rebellion against man's rebellion. But when you're the minority, you feel like you're the one in rebellion, right? When the whole world is rebelling against God, you have to be a rebel not to rebel against God. It's kind of seems a little backwards, I guess, but it makes sense in my mind anyways.